Welcome to Destination 101, the podcast of Toastmasters District 101. In this alternate short format, instead of a road trip along our namesake of Highway 101 in California, think of this as a short pit stop or a vista point. I'm your host, Birgit Starmanns. Hello, and welcome to our first podcast of Destination 101 in 2022. Happy New Year! In this episode, I'd like to talk about audience participation as it pertains to speaking. Now, I have some history with audience participation in the dance world. In college, I danced at a theme park for every summer, and as part of the German show in Busch Gardens in Williamsburg, Virginia, we had audience participation numbers. That basically meant we went out into the audience and grabbed people to dance the polka with us, or we grabbed a lot of kids to do the kiddie maypole. Well, that's the pure kind of audience participation where you're essentially pulling someone into your presentation. And that is very rare in a normal presentation or speech environment. Instead, let's talk a little bit about the different techniques that have been used to engage an audience, and then also think about what that means in person as well as online. The first is to ask a question. There are a couple of different approaches here because you might be asking a question just to get the participants to start thinking about a situation, asking them if they have ever experienced a certain situation. Have you ever played on a sports team? Have you ever felt disappointed? Have you ever felt excited? Unfortunately, so many people use that technique that it gets a little bit old sometimes, but it's definitely effective if you have a more motivational speech. Now, in order to gauge audience responses, in person it's a lot easier because you can see people nodding and maybe even whispering to the person that they're sitting next to. And online, I see a lot of speakers say, type yes if you agree, except they never look back at the chat. And some people are actually typing comments in there. And of course, the speaker should be concentrating on the presentation. So sometimes I'll type in there no just to see if anybody catches it. And to be honest, no one ever has. So don't ask for interaction if you're not going to act on it. Another mechanism is to involve audience members to actually give you responses. This is not a magic show where you're going to be asking somebody to pick a card, or maybe you do. But if you have a question, has anyone here played on a football team? And you might point at somebody and say, well, which position did you play? Were you quarterback, etc.? That's much easier to do in person because online, especially if you have enough people attending your presentation or your webinar, that as a speaker, you don't have time to scroll through to see who might be raising their hands. So here, you might need an assistant to call out people's names where they would be willing to respond because they raised their hand either physically in the window in Zoom or because they raised their hands electronically. The biggest piece of advice I would have here is to always have a fallback of one or two people that you can call on in case nobody actually volunteers an answer. But that way you can get very specific and involve individual audience members. Finally, there's the whole idea of voting, getting a sense of the interest of the people in the audience. I use this quite a bit in business conferences because when I speak about software, I want to know how many business users are in my audience and how many IT folks are in the audience. And I can actually accommodate my talking points based on the majority, or if it's about a 50-50 split, I can keep my talking points about even. Now for voting, again, just like asking a question, it can be very difficult to raise hands. Again, if you need to scroll through multiple windows to see how many people are raising their hands, I would again advise having an assistant do that. Instead, think about the use of a poll, for example, in Zoom, because that way you can have several different options. And then when you show the results of the poll, you can speak to the results of the poll. And that way you're not estimating how many people are actually on one side of the question or the other. It will actually calculate the percentage for you. Again, if you're going to do a poll, I would highly recommend that you speak to the results of the poll. So be prepared to do that as well, even though that might be a bit of an impromptu part of the presentation. Again, my biggest recommendation if you're going to engage the audience online is to have an assistant that will help identify the people who are more engaged, who can be called on, and to do things like kick off the poll or show poll results. Because as a speaker, you don't want to be distracted by having to deal with a keyboard and different buttons that you have to push in order to make things happen. Now, taking it back to my theme park days, I can't really invite you to polka right now, but I can invite you to leave me feedback on this particular podcast and hope you join us again for the next episode. Tune in next time and comment or email us at destination101.podcast@gmail.com. And review prior episodes at www.d101tm.org/destination-101. Chat with you soon.